The universe had been peaceful for 3,000 years. Across 47 star systems, hundreds of species lived in harmony under the wise guidance of the Galactic Council. Wars were ancient history. Conflict was resolved through meditation and careful negotiation. Violence was considered the mark of a primitive species that hadn't yet evolved beyond their base instincts. Then, humanity arrived, and everything changed in the span of a single sentence. What you're about to read is the true account of how one human's words shattered millennia of peace, exposed the dark secrets the Council had been hiding, and ignited a war that would reshape the very fabric of galactic civilization. It's the story of how the most primitive species in the galaxy became the catalyst for the greatest revolution the universe had ever seen. Some say it was inevitable. Others call it humanity's greatest gift to the cosmos. The Council called it an act of war. But before you judge, you need to understand what really happened in that chamber. You need to know what words were spoken that day, and why they terrified the most powerful beings in the galaxy so much that they chose annihilation over negotiation. This is that story. This is how humanity taught the universe that sometimes the only way to achieve true peace is to be willing to fight for it. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stepped through the shimmering portal that connected Earth's first interstellar embassy to the Galactic Council's primary station. The transition always made her stomach lurch, even after 6 months of diplomatic meetings. The artificial gravity on the other side was slightly heavier than Earth's, and the atmosphere carried the faint scent of ozone and something sweetly metallic that she could never quite identify. The Council station hung in the void between stars, a massive crystalline structure that pulsed with soft blue light. It had been humanity's first glimpse of true alien architecture when the Zephyrians had made contact 2 years ago. Even now, Elena marveled at the organic curves and impossible angles that seemed to defy physics while remaining somehow elegant and peaceful. Ambassador Vasquez came the melodious voice of Counselor Thelnara, the Zephyrian who had become Elena's primary contact with the Council. The tall, graceful being approached with flowing movements that reminded Elena of underwater ballet. Thelnara's skin shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that indicated calm satisfaction, though Elena was still learning to read the complex emotional displays. "Counselor, thank you for arranging today's session," Elena replied, adjusting the translation device on her collar. The technology was remarkable, converting not just words, but emotional context and cultural nuance between species. It had made these negotiations possible, though Elena sometimes wondered what subtleties were lost in translation. "The Council is most eager to hear humanity's formal response to our integration proposal," Thelnara said, gesturing toward the main chamber. "Your species has shown remarkable adaptability during the observation period." Elena nodded, though something in the counselor's tone made her uneasy. The observation period had been 2 years of careful cultural exchange, with human representatives living on the Council station while alien observers studied Earth. It was standard procedure, according to Thelnara, designed to ensure peaceful integration of new species into the galactic community. But Elena had noticed things during those 2 years. Small inconsistencies. Moments when conversations would abruptly change direction when she asked certain questions. Areas of the station that were mysteriously off-limits. And, most troubling of all, the complete absence of any species that had joined the Council within the last 1,000 years. The main Council chamber was a vast amphitheater that could have held 10,000 beings. Today, representatives from 23 different species were present, arranged in a perfect circle around a central platform where Elena would deliver humanity's response. The diversity was breathtaking. Crystalline beings that communicated through resonant tones, gaseous entities contained within environmental suits, and creatures so alien that Elena's human brain struggled to process their forms. At the center of it all sat the High Arbiter, an ancient being whose species name was unpronounceable to human vocal cords. The entity appeared as a shifting column of dark energy, occasionally forming what might have been facial features before dissolving back into abstract patterns. It had existed for over 5,000 years, according to the historical records, and was said to embody the accumulated wisdom of dozens of extinct civilizations. Human representative, the High Arbiter's voice resonated directly in Elena's mind, bypassing her ears entirely. Your species has completed the observation period. The Council has reviewed your cultural development, technological advancement, and psychological profiles. We are prepared to offer humanity full membership in the Galactic Collective. Elena felt a thrill of excitement, mixed with apprehension. This was the moment humanity had been working towards since first contact. The opportunity to join a peaceful galactic civilization, to share knowledge and resources with dozens of advanced species, to leave behind the conflicts and limitations that had plagued Earth for millennia. But her briefing materials weighed heavily in her mind. In the weeks leading up to this moment, human scientists and analysts had compiled disturbing questions about the Council's true nature. Radio telescope observations had detected evidence of civilizations that should have been Council members, but seemed to have vanished entirely. Archaeological surveys on uninhabited worlds had found ruins of technology far beyond what any current Council species possessed. Most disturbing of all were the mathematical models. Dr. Sarah Chun, Earth's leading xenobiologist, had calculated that given the rate of species development in the galaxy, there should have been thousands of spacefaring civilizations by now. Yet the Council claimed only 47 species had ever achieved interstellar travel in the past million years. The terms of membership are simple, the High Arbiter continued, its mental voice carrying undertones of absolute certainty. Humanity will relocate to the designated worlds within Council space. Earth will be preserved as a nature sanctuary, visited only by approved research teams. Human military capabilities will be transferred to Council oversight for the greater galactic peace. Your species will contribute its unique perspectives to our collective wisdom while benefiting from technologies beyond your current understanding. Elena's heart raced as she processed what she was hearing. This wasn't membership, it was absorption. The Council wasn't inviting humanity to join as equals. They were offering a comfortable prison in exchange for everything that made humanity independent. She thought of Earth's sprawling cities, its 7 billion people, its chaotic democracy, and messy conflicts and beautiful diversity. The Council wanted to strip all of that away, to turn humanity into another peaceful, compliant member species living in harmony under their guidance. I understand the generous nature of your offer, Elena began carefully, her diplomatic training kicking in. However, I must ask for clarification on several points. When you mention relocating humanity, are you suggesting that Earth itself would be abandoned? A subtle shift rippled through the chamber. Several species-specific translation devices chittered and hummed as the question was processed and relayed. Elena noticed that some of the representatives seemed surprised by her query, as if the question itself was unexpected. Counselor Thora's bioluminescent patterns shifted to what Elena had learned indicated concern. Ambassador, the relocation process is designed for humanity's benefit. Council worlds offer perfect climate control, advanced medical technology, and freedom from the conflicts that plague primitive homeworlds. Your people would want for nothing. But what happened to the other species' homeworlds? Elena pressed. In our astronomical surveys, we've identified several star systems that show signs of former civilization but are now uninhabited. Were those Council member homeworlds that were also preserved as nature sanctuaries? The silence that followed was deafening. Elena could feel the weight of dozens of alien gazes focused on her, and the emotional resonance in the chamber had shifted to something that her human instincts interpreted as distinctly threatening. The High Arbiter's energy form pulsed with darker patterns. Human representative, such questions demonstrate the primitive curiosity that makes your species unsuitable for advanced civilization. The Council's wisdom spans millennia. We do not explain our methods to newly contacted species. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. The mask was slipping. The gentle, wise guardians of galactic peace were showing their true colors, and she was beginning to understand why no species had joined the Council in recent memory. She activated the emergency recording system built into her translation device, knowing that her next words will be transmitted instantly back to Earth through the quantum communication array. Whatever happened next, humanity would have warning. "Counselor Thelnara," she said, turning to face the Zephyrian directly. "I have one more question. In your historical records of council formation, you mentioned that the founding species came together voluntarily after achieving a state of perfect peace. But our analysis of galactic radio transmissions suggests otherwise. We've detected what appear to be distress signals from civilizations that went silent shortly before their star systems were depopulated. Can you explain this discrepancy?" The chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien voices, translation devices struggling to keep up with the flood of communication between species. Elena caught fragments, words like security breach, information contamination, and, most chillingly, sterilization protocol. Thelnara's bioluminescent patterns had shifted to angry reds and pulsing oranges. "Ambassador Vasquez, you are exceeding the bounds of diplomatic discourse. These questions are not appropriate for a species seeking council membership, because the answers would reveal that the council isn't a peaceful alliance," Elena said, her voice carrying clearly in the vast chamber despite her racing heartbeat. "It's a conquering force that destroys civilizations and relocates the survivors to controlled environments. You're not offering us membership. You're giving us the choice between voluntary exile or extinction." The High Arbiter rose from its seat, the column of dark energy expanding until it towered over the chamber. When it spoke, its mental voice carried the weight of absolute authority and barely contained rage. "Human, you speak of matters beyond your comprehension. The Council maintains galactic peace through necessary measures. Young species lack the wisdom to govern themselves without destroying others. We provide guidance, structure, and survival by destroying their homeworlds and imprisoning them on reservation planets." Elena shot back. "That's not peace. That's tyranny dressed up in pretty words." She pulled out the data pad containing Earth's official response and held it high for all the representatives to see. "The United Nations of Earth formally rejects the Council's offer of membership. We choose to remain independent, to develop our own destiny among the stars, and to make our own mistakes and achievements as a free species." The chamber fell completely silent. Elena could hear only the soft hum of the station's life support systems and her own thundering heartbeat. Every alien representative was perfectly still, as if her words had literally frozen them in place. The High Arbiter's energy form began to pulse with deep crimson patterns that Elena's human brain interpreted as pure, incandescent fury. "Human," it said, its mental voice now carrying harmonics that made Elena's skull ache. "No species has ever rejected council membership. No species has ever been permitted to develop independently once contacted. You have two choices: accept relocation voluntarily, or face the consequences of defying galactic order." Elena straightened her shoulders and looked directly at the ancient entity, drawing on every ounce of courage her diplomatic training had given her. She thought of Earth, of humanity's long history of standing up to tyrants and oppressors, of all the times her species had chosen freedom over security. "Then, I suppose you're about to learn something new about humans," she said clearly. "We've never been very good at accepting ultimatums from bullies, no matter how powerful they claim to be." The High Arbiter's form exploded outward, filling half the chamber with swirling darkness shot through with veins of angry light. When it spoke again, its voice resonated not just in Elena's mind, but in the minds of every being present. "Then, humanity has chosen extinction. The Council will not permit an independent species to threaten galactic stability. War is declared." Elena activated the emergency recall protocol on her translation device, feeling the familiar disorientation as the quantum tunnel opened to pull her back to Earth. As she was drawn through the portal, she caught a final glimpse of the chamber erupting into activity, representatives moving with urgent purpose as the Council mobilized for the first war it had fought in 3 millennia. The last thing she saw before the tunnel closed was Councillor Thona's bioluminescent patterns. Now pulsing with what she had learned was the Zephyrian expression for profound regret. Elena materialized in the emergency briefing room beneath the UN building in New York, where Secretary General Morrison and the Joint Chiefs were already assembled around a holographic display showing real-time monitoring of Earth's solar system. Ambassador, report, Morrison said tersely. Elena pulled herself upright, still shaking from the adrenaline and the shock of what had just occurred. Sir, the Council is not what they claim to be. They're a galactic empire that conquers species by offering them false choices. They've declared war on humanity for refusing to submit to their control. General Patterson stepped forward, his expression grim. Our deep space sensors are picking up massive energy signatures moving toward our system. Whatever they're bringing, it's unlike anything in our technology databases. Elena moved to the central console and began uploading the data from her emergency recordings. We need to warn every nation, every military command. The Council has been playing this game for millennia. They know exactly how to break civilizations that resist them. How long do we have? Morrison asked. Elena looked at the tactical display, where dozens of red contacts were approaching Earth's solar system at velocities that should have been impossible. Based on their apparent speed, maybe 72 hours before they reach our outer defenses. The room fell silent as the full magnitude of the situation sank in. Humanity had just declared independence from a galactic empire that had never lost a war in 3,000 years. Morrison straightened his shoulders in a gesture that reminded Elena of her own defiant stance in the council chamber. Then, we'd better make those 72 hours count. General Patterson, activate all military commands and begin immediate deployment of our emergency protocols. Dr. Chun, I need everything your teams have learned about Council technology. As alarms began sounding throughout the building and emergency broadcasts went out to every nation on Earth, Elena couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Humanity was about to face its greatest challenge, and they were meeting it the same way they had met every other crisis in their history. Together, defiant, and absolutely refusing to surrender their freedom. The war for humanity's independence was about to begin. Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, humanity's most advanced warship, and watched through the main viewport as Earth's hastily assembled defense fleet took formation around Luna Base. 72 hours had passed since Ambassador Vasquez's dramatic rejection of the Council's ultimatum, and now the enemy was here. The Council fleet was unlike anything humanity had ever imagined. Through the enhanced telescopic displays, Chun could see ships that defied conventional understanding of engineering. Crystalline vessels that seemed to grow rather than be built, their surfaces rippling with energy patterns. Organic-looking craft that pulsed like living hearts, their hull plating shifting and adapting as they moved. And at the center of it all, a massive command ship that appeared to be constructed from pure energy held in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Admiral, we're receiving communication requests on all frequencies, reported Lieutenant Commander Torres from the communication station. The Council fleet is demanding immediate surrender and compliance with relocation protocols. Shin kept her eyes fixed on the enemy formation. 300 ships against humanity's entire space-capable military force of 47 vessels. On paper, it should have been a massacre. But Chen had spent the last 3 days reviewing every piece of intelligence humanity had gathered about Council technology, and she had begun to notice something interesting. Patch me through to all human commanders, she ordered. This is Admiral Chun to all vessels. Begin Operation Thermopylae on my mark. The plan was desperate, but it was based on a crucial insight that Dr. Elena Vasquez's xenobiology team had provided during the frantic preparation period. The Council species were all highly advanced, peaceful civilizations that had been conquering through overwhelming technological superiority for millennia. They had never faced an enemy that understood asymmetrical warfare, psychological tactics, or the kind of brutal improvisation that humanity had perfected through countless conflicts. More importantly, they had grown complacent. The Council's last real war had been 3,000 years ago. Their military doctrine was based on intimidation and technological demonstration rather than actual combat experience. Admiral, the Council fleet is broadcasting surrender demands, Torres reported. They're giving us 1 hour to begin evacuation procedures before they commence what they're calling pacification operations. Chen smiled grimly. Send a reply on all frequencies. Tell them that humanity's response can be summarized in 2 words that have never failed us in the face of tyranny. She paused dramatically, knowing that her words were being broadcast not just to the Council fleet, but to every human settlement from Earth to the Mars colonies to the asteroid mining stations. Go fuck yourselves. The effect on the Council fleet was immediate and dramatic. Energy signatures spiked across their formation as the alien commanders presumably struggled to process the concept that their ultimatum had not only been rejected, but responded to with what their translation systems would undoubtedly interpret as a grave insult. Chen had counted on exactly this reaction. The Council species were all highly evolved, peaceful civilizations that communicated through careful negotiation and diplomatic protocols. They had no cultural framework for understanding humans who would respond to overwhelming force with crude defiance. All ships, execute Thermopylae now, Chen commanded. What happened next would later be studied in military academies across the galaxy as one of the most innovative tactical maneuvers in recorded history. Instead of forming a traditional defensive line, the human fleet scattered in all directions, each ship following a carefully calculated trajectory that would take them through the asteroid belt surrounding Earth's solar system. The Council fleet, expecting either immediate surrender or a conventional space battle, was caught completely off guard as their targets suddenly disappeared among millions of space rocks. Admiral, Council forces are attempting to pursue individual human vessels, reported Commander Jackson from the tactical station. They're splitting their formation. Perfect, Chen said. They're thinking like civilized beings instead of warriors. Execute Phase 2. What the Council commanders didn't understand was that humans had been preparing for this specific scenario for decades, ever since the possibility of hostile alien contact had been seriously considered by military planners. Every asteroid in the belt had been surveyed and mapped. Hidden supply caches and weapons platforms had been secretly installed throughout the system. Most importantly, the entire belt had been rigged with a network of nuclear charges that could be detonated remotely. The first Council ships to enter the asteroid field were Zephyrian crystal vessels, their elegant forms gliding through space with the same graceful movements that characterized their species. They were scanning for human vessels when the UES Prometheus emerged from behind a massive asteroid and opened fire at point-blank range. The human ship's weapons were primitive by Council standards, simple kinetic projectiles and basic energy weapons. But they had been designed with one crucial advantage. They were specifically calibrated to disrupt the harmonic frequencies that held Zephyrian crystal ships together. The effect was spectacular. The elegant alien vessel shuddered as its crystalline structure began to resonate uncontrollably, fractures spreading across its hull like spider webs. Within seconds, the entire ship shattered into glittering fragments that scattered through space like deadly confetti. First kill confirmed, reported the Prometheus. Council vessel destroyed. Across the asteroid belt, similar ambushes were taking place. Human ships that had been dismissed as primitive and outgunned were systematically hunting down individual Council vessels using terrain they knew intimately and weapons specifically designed to exploit each species' technological vulnerabilities. The Vorthack Gassenity ships found their containment systems failing when human weapons introduced specific chemical compounds into their hulls. The biomechanical Kellen vessels discovered that their living components couldn't adapt quickly enough to counter targeted viral infections delivered by human boarding torpedoes. But it was the psychological effect that was most devastating to the Council forces. For 3 millennia, they had been the undisputed masters of space warfare. They had never faced an enemy that refused to be intimidated, that turned their own advanced technology against them, or that seemed to actually enjoy the chaos of battle. Council fleet is attempting to regroup, Jackson reported. They're pulling back from the asteroid field. Shin nodded. The first phase had gone exactly as planned, but she knew this was just the beginning. The Council had lost perhaps a dozen ships out of 300, and they would adapt quickly once they overcame their initial shock. Signal all human vessels to fall back to Rally Point Delta, she ordered. It's time for Phase 3. What the Council commanders didn't realize was that the asteroid belt engagement had been a deliberate feint. While they had been focused on hunting down human ships among the space rocks, other elements of humanity's defense plan had been moving into position. The real surprise was waiting for them in the shadow of Jupiter. As the Council fleet reorganized and began pursuing the retreating human vessels, they passed through what their sensors indicated was empty space. The massive gas giant's magnetic field interfered with their detection systems just enough to mask what was hidden there. Dr. Elizabeth Park had spent the last 2 years developing what she called the Crazy Ivan Protocol, a weapons system so insane that no rational, civilized species would ever consider building it. It consisted of a series of automated platforms hidden throughout Jupiter's magnetosphere, each equipped with a simple but devastating payload. Massive chunks of metallic asteroid material accelerated to near-light speed using magnetic rail guns powered by Jupiter's own electromagnetic field. The Council fleet realized something was wrong when the first kinetic projectiles began tearing through their formation. By the time they identified the source of the attack, it was too late to avoid the killing field that had been prepared for them. The High Arbiter's command ship, an entity of pure energy that had seemed invulnerable to conventional weapons, found itself under assault from projectiles moving so fast that they existed in a quantum state between matter and energy. When the first one struck its energy matrix, the ancient being experienced something it hadn't felt in 5,000 years: physical pain. Impossible, the High Arbiter's mental voice echoed across the Council fleet's communication network. How can such primitive beings inflict harm upon us? The answer came from Commander Jackson aboard the Defiance, whose transmission was intercepted and translated by the Council systems. We've had 10,000 years of practice killing things that thought they were invincible. The Jupiter ambush lasted only minutes, but when it was over, the Council fleet had lost nearly a third of its vessels. More importantly, they had lost something far more valuable: their sense of invincibility. For the first time in millennia, the Council was facing an enemy that not only refused to surrender, but seemed to be actively winning the engagement. Aboard the High Arbiter's damaged command ship, emergency councils were convening among the surviving species representatives. The Zephyrian counselors' bioluminescent patterns flickered with confusion and fear. The Vorthack gas entities swirled in agitated patterns within their containment suits. Even the ancient Kellen bioships were pulsing with what could only be described as anxiety. "This is unprecedented," transmitted Counselor Thelnara from her emergency pod, her elegant ship having been one of the casualties in the asteroid field. No species has ever inflicted such casualties upon a Council fleet. These humans fight with a savagery that defies comprehension. The High Arbiter's energy form pulsed with dark patterns as it struggled to process what had occurred. For 3,000 years, the Council's military doctrine had been based on overwhelming technological superiority and the inherent pacifism of evolved civilizations. They had never encountered a species that seemed to view warfare not as a last resort but as a natural expression of their competitive nature. Analysis of human combat patterns suggests they have been preparing for large-scale warfare for their entire recorded history, reported the AI systems aboard the command ship. Their tactical adaptations appear to be based on millennia of experience fighting technologically superior opponents. "That is impossible," the High Arbiter replied. No species can maintain such aggressive tendencies and achieve interstellar travel. The mathematics of social evolution precluded, but the evidence was undeniable. Humanity had not only survived their first encounter with the Council fleet, but had dealt significant damage while suffering minimal casualties. Their tactics were unlike anything in the Council's vast military databases, a combination of desperate innovation, reckless courage, and what could only be described as predatory cunning. Admiral Chun, meanwhile, was already planning the next phase of humanity's defense. The asteroid field and Jupiter ambushes had been successful beyond her wildest expectations, but she knew the Council would adapt quickly. The next engagement will be much more difficult. All human vessels fall back to Earth defensive perimeter, she broadcast. Prepare for final phase operations. As the battered Council fleet regrouped and began its approach toward Earth, Chin couldn't help but smile. The enemy still had overwhelming numerical superiority and technological advantages that humanity couldn't match. But they had revealed something crucial about themselves in these first engagements. They were afraid. For the first time in 3 millennia, the Council was facing an opponent that not only refused to submit, but seemed genuinely dangerous. They were used to fighting opponents who shared their civilized values, their preference for minimal casualties, their desire to preserve life and infrastructure. They had no framework for understanding an enemy that would deliberately crash damaged ships into their vessels while broadcasting messages like "Remember the Alamo" and "Death before dishonor." They couldn't comprehend beings who would sing combat songs while engaging in suicide attacks, or who would taunt them with insults that their translation systems couldn't even properly process. Most disturbing of all, from the Council's perspective, was the growing realization that humanity might actually be enjoying this. As the survivors of the Council fleet approached Earth, they found waiting for them not a cowering planet begging for mercy, but a world that had transformed itself into the most heavily fortified position in the galaxy. Every major city was surrounded by defensive installations. The moon had been turned into a massive weapons platform. The space around Earth swarmed with thousands of small, fast-attack craft operated by human pilots who seemed to view combat against impossible odds as a recreational activity. And from Earth itself came a transmission that would be recorded in galactic history as the moment when the Council first understood that they had awakened something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. It was Admiral Chin's voice, broadcast on all frequencies with perfect clarity. "Attention, Council fleet. You came here expecting to find a primitive species that would beg for mercy. Instead, you found humanity. We've been waiting our entire history for someone like you to show up. Welcome to Earth. Try not to die too quickly." The High Arbiter felt something it hadn't experienced in its 5,000-year existence, the cold touch of genuine fear. The battle for Earth was about to begin, and for the first time in the Council's history, victory was no longer a certainty. The battle for Earth began at 0347 hours Greenwich Mean Time, when the first wave of Council ships attempted to breach humanity's orbital defense perimeter. What followed would be recorded as the most savage space battle in galactic history, a 12-hour engagement that would fundamentally change how every species in the galaxy viewed warfare. Dr. Sarah Chan watched from the command bunker beneath Geneva as tactical displays showed the Council fleet's approach. The enemy formation was different now, more cautious, with overlapping defensive screens and careful spacing between vessels. They had learned from their earlier losses and were no longer underestimating human capabilities. "Council forces are maintaining maximum range," reported General Martinez from his position at the tactical console. "They're trying to engage our orbital platforms with long-range energy weapons." Chin nodded, her fingers dancing across her workstation as she coordinated with research teams around the globe. The past 72 hours had been the most intensive scientific collaboration in human history, with every major university and research facility working around the clock to develop countermeasures against Council technology. "Are the neural disruption fields ready?" she asked. Standing by in all sectors, came the reply from DR. Yamamoto at Tokyo University. Psi-Core teams report full readiness. The neural disruption fields were humanity's most desperate gambit, based on research that had been considered purely theoretical until 3 days ago. Dr. Chen's xenobiology teams had discovered that several council species used advanced telepathic communication networks to coordinate their fleet operations. If those networks could be disrupted, their tactical coordination would collapse. The only problem was that the disruption fields required human volunteers with specific neural patterns to operate them, patterns that were found almost exclusively in individuals with severe mental illness or traumatic brain injuries. The volunteers would be exposing themselves to psychic feedback that could cause permanent damage or death. Incredibly, when the call for volunteers had gone out, over 10,000 humans had stepped forward. Dr. Chun came a transmission from the orbital platform Vanguard. This is Colonel Patricia Williams. Psi-Core team Alpha ready for neural strike. We can see the bastards from here, and they're even uglier than the pictures. Chun smiled despite the gravity of the situation. Colonel Williams had been one of the first volunteers, a former Air Force pilot who had suffered severe neurological damage in a crash 5 years earlier. The same brain trauma that had ended her flying career had left her perfectly suited to operate the neural disruption equipment. Copy that, Colonel. Execute on my mark. On the tactical display, the Council fleet was beginning its bombardment of Earth's outer defensive ring. Energy beams lanced out from their vessels, striking the orbital fortresses that humanity had constructed in the 3 days since the war began. But the human installations were designed with a crucial understanding of Council psychology. They were built to look more damaged than they actually were. The Council commanders, seeing their weapons apparently destroying human defenses, pressed their attack more aggressively. Ship after ship moved closer to Earth, seeking to establish orbital bombardment positions over major population centers. They were walking straight into humanity's trap. All Psi-Core teams, execute now, Chen ordered. Across the orbital platforms, human volunteers activated devices that had been constructed based on designs that should have been impossible for a non-telepathic species to develop. The neural disruptor fields reached out through space, seeking the psychic networks that bound the Council fleet together. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Aboard the Zephyrian vessels, crystalline beings that had communicated through harmonic resonance for millions of years suddenly found themselves isolated in screaming silence. Vorthack gas entities that shared collective consciousness through quantum entanglement discovered that their very identity was being torn apart. The ancient bioships of the Kellen Collective writhed in psychic agony as their living nervous systems were flooded with chaotic interference. Most affected of all was the High Arbiter itself. The ancient entity that existed as pure mental energy found its consciousness under direct assault by something it couldn't understand. The chaotic, undisciplined, gloriously insane thought patterns of human minds that had been damaged by war and trauma and yet refused to surrender. What is happening? The High Arbiter's mental scream echoed across the fleet as its ordered thoughts were invaded by images of human soldiers charging enemy positions while singing battle hymns, of pilots ramming their damaged fighters into enemy vessels while laughing at death, of entire civilizations that preferred extinction to submission. The Council fleet began to scatter as individual ships lost contact with their command structure. Vessels that had operated in perfect coordination for millennia suddenly found themselves operating independently, their commanders struggling to understand why their telepathic networks had gone silent. It was exactly the opening that Admiral Sarah Chun had been waiting for. All human forces commenced general assault, she broadcast from the bridge of the Defiance. Remember, we're not just fighting for Earth, we're fighting for the right to be free, ugly, chaotic humans for the rest of galactic history. The response was everything she could have hoped for, and more. From orbital platforms came waves of kinetic projectiles and guided missiles. From lunar bases launched fighters piloted by volunteers who had trained for this moment their entire lives. From hidden installations throughout the solar system came every weapon humanity had ever devised, from simple explosive charges to exotic matter disruptors that barely worked and might have been more dangerous to their operators than to the enemy. But the most devastating attack came from an unexpected source. Captain James Morrison of the civilian freighter Lucky Strike had been hauling ice from the asteroid belt when the war began. Like thousands of other civilian spacers, he had volunteered his ship for the defense effort despite having no military training whatsoever. What he did have was 40 years of experience piloting cargo vessels through the most dangerous regions of space, along with the kind of creative problem-solving skills that came from keeping aging equipment functional on a shoestring budget. When a neural disruption fields scattered the Council formation, Morrison saw an opportunity. His ship was loaded with 20,000 tons of water ice, and he was positioned perfectly between the confused enemy fleet and Jupiter's massive gravitational field. "This is Lucky Strike to all human forces," he transmitted. "I've got an idea that's either brilliant or completely insane. Either way, it's going to be one hell of a ride." Morrison engaged his ship's emergency thrusters and began accelerating directly toward the center of the Council formation. At the same time, he activated the cargo bay doors and began venting his entire load of ice into space, creating a massive cloud of frozen water vapor that would be invisible to most Council sensors. The enemy vessels, still struggling to coordinate their defenses, barely noticed the approaching freighter until it was too late. Morrison's ship slammed into the command vessel, carrying the Vorthack gas entity commanders, its impact causing a chain reaction that ruptured their containment systems. The Vorthack entities, suddenly exposed to vacuum, began to dissipate into space. But as they died, their natural electromagnetic properties interacted with Morrison's ice cloud, creating a phenomenon that human scientists would later struggle to explain. The water vapor, supercharged with alien electromagnetic energy, formed what could only be described as a lightning storm in space. Electrical discharges leaped from ship to ship throughout the Council formation, overloading systems and causing cascade failures across their entire fleet. Morrison's last transmission before his ship was destroyed was characteristically human. "Lucky Strike to all hands. Tell my wife I finally found a use for all that ice nobody wanted to buy." The sacrifice of Captain Morrison and hundreds of other humans like him had a devastating effect on Council morale. The alien species were used to warfare conducted according to civilized rules, with appropriate concern for minimizing casualties and preserving valuable resources. They had no frame of reference for understanding humans who would deliberately sacrifice their lives not for strategic advantage, but simply to inflict maximum damage on the enemy. Even more disturbing, from the Council perspective, was the way other humans reacted to these sacrifices. Instead of mourning or retreating, the response was invariably to fight with even greater fury while broadcasting what could only be described as celebration of their fallen comrades' actions. The High Arbiter, its consciousness still reeling from the psychic assault, tried to rally its forces. All Council vessels withdraw to maximum range and prepare for orbital bombardment. These creatures must be destroyed before they contaminate other species with their insanity. But the Council fleet was no longer operating as a coordinated force. Individual ship commanders, cut off from their telepathic networks, were making decisions based on their own species' instincts. The naturally cautious Zephyrians began withdrawing toward the edge of the solar system. The predatory Kellen collective turned on damaged Council vessels, their bio-ships consuming the wounded like sharks in a feeding frenzy. Most problematic of all were the Vorthack survivors, whose gas entity consciousness had been so disrupted by the neural fields that they were attacking friend and foe alike, their normally peaceful nature replaced by something that human observers could only describe as homicidal madness. Dr. Chun, monitoring the chaos from her command bunker, couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. "Are they actually fighting each other now?" "Confirmed," reported General Martinez. "Council fleet cohesion has completely collapsed. Multiple incidents of friendly fire, and at least 3 different species groups have stopped targeting human forces entirely." It was the moment Chun had been hoping for since the battle began. The Council's greatest strength had always been the unity of purpose that came from their telepathic coordination. Without it, they were just a collection of individual species with different instincts, different priorities, and different definitions of acceptable casualties. But humanity was just getting started. From the lunar bases came the second wave of human counterattack. Not warships, but modified civilian vessels piloted by volunteers who had signed up knowing they were participating in what were essentially suicide missions. Cargo haulers loaded with nuclear explosives rammed council vessels while broadcasting messages of defiance. Passenger liners converted to carry kinetic weapons engaged alien dreadnoughts in close-range combat, while their crews sang traditional songs from their home nations. Most memorable of all was the actions of the civilian crew's ship Paradise Lost, which had been converted into a troop transport for the evacuation efforts. When Captain Elena Rodriguez saw the Council fleet beginning to target civilian settlements on Earth, she made a decision that would be remembered in human history for millennia to come. "This is Captain Rodriguez. To all human forces," she transmitted. "Paradise Lost is beginning attack run on enemy command vessel. We have 3,000 civilians aboard, including 400 children. If these bastards want to target non-combatants, let's show them what non-combatants can do when they're properly motivated." What followed was perhaps the most audacious maneuver in the history of space warfare. The Paradise Lost, a ship designed for luxury cruises and completely unarmed, began an attack run against the High Arbiter's heavily defended command vessel. The ship's only weapon was its emergency escape pods, which had been rigged with explosive charges and programmed to seek out the alien vessel's energy matrix. The Council fleet, already demoralized and confused, watched in stunned disbelief as the civilian ship deliberately flew into their defensive fire while launching wave after wave of escape pods like missiles. Each pod was piloted by a human volunteer, and each one carried a message that was broadcast on all frequencies as it approached its target. "This is Engineer Kowalski in Pod 17. I've got 40 years of maintenance experience and a message from Earth. Nobody threatens our kids, and lives to talk about it. Pod 23 here. Name's Jennifer Wu. I'm 12 years old. And you picked the wrong species to mess with. Pod 41 transmitting. This is Father Michael Santos, and I want you to know that God loves you, but humanity's about to arrange the meeting." The psychological impact on the Council forces was devastating. They were watching an enemy that would not only sacrifice military personnel, but would send children into battle while making jokes about their own impending deaths. It was beyond their comprehension of rational behavior. When the Paradise Lost finally succumbed to enemy fire, its destruction triggered a chain reaction among the human forces. Instead of retreating in horror, every human vessel in the battle zone began broadcasting the same message on all frequencies. Remember the Paradise Lost. The High Arbiter, its ancient consciousness struggling to process what it was witnessing, made a desperate attempt to restore order to its forces. All Council vessels, immediate withdrawal to staging area. Prepare for planet-killing bombardment. This species cannot be allowed to survive. But it was too late. The battle had already been decided not by superior technology or tactical brilliance, but by something the Council had never encountered in 3 millennia of conquest, an enemy that simply refused to be defeated, no matter the cost. As the surviving Council vessels began their retreat toward the edge of Earth's solar system, they left behind a debris field containing the wreckage of over half their fleet. The mighty armada that had arrived expecting quick submission and easy victory was now a broken remnant fleeing from a species they had dismissed as primitive savages. Admiral Chun, watching the enemy withdraw from the bridge of the Defiance, felt no sense of triumph. She had seen too many good people die in the past 12 hours to feel anything but grim satisfaction. But she also knew that this was only the beginning. "Signal all human forces," she ordered. "Secure the system and begin recovery operations. We've won the first battle, but the Council isn't going to give up that easily." As rescue ships moved out to recover survivors from the debris field, Chin couldn't help but think about what had just happened. Humanity had faced the most powerful military force in the galaxy, and not only survived but emerged victorious. They had done it not through superior technology or brilliant strategy, but by being exactly what they had always been: chaotic, violent, unreasonable, and absolutely unwilling to submit to anyone who tried to tell them how to live. The question now was what the Council would do next. They had never faced a defeat like this, never encountered an enemy that could match their technology with pure, undiluted aggression and creativity. Humanity was about to find out that winning the first battle was the easy part. The real war was just beginning. 3 weeks after humanity's stunning victory at Earth, the galaxy was in chaos. News of the Council's defeat had spread through underground communication networks that connected enslaved populations across dozens of star systems. For the first time in 3 millennia, subject species were beginning to question whether their overlords were truly invincible. On the Council's central command world of Nexus Prime, an emergency session was convening that would determine the fate of hundreds of billions of sentient beings. The massive chamber that had once hosted peaceful deliberations now echoed with urgent voices speaking in dozens of alien languages, all focused on a single, unprecedented crisis. The High Arbiter stood at the center of the assembly, its energy form flickering with patterns that indicated severe psychological distress. In 5,000 years of existence, it had never experienced defeat, never encountered a situation that couldn't be resolved through superior technology and overwhelming force. "The human infection is spreading," reported Counselor Vextai of the Crystalline Zephyrians, her harmonic voice carrying undertones of deep concern. "Our intelligence networks indicate uprisings on 14 worlds. Subject species are openly questioning Council authority." The news was even worse than the High Arbiter had feared. The mathematical models had predicted this possibility. Once one species successfully resisted the Council, others would inevitably follow. But the models had assumed that any resistance would be quickly crushed before it could inspire others. No one had calculated for the possibility that the resistance would actually win. "The Terran combat recordings are being distributed through illegal channels," added Commander Zixloth of the Biomechanical Kellen Collective, his voice crackling through damaged vocal synthesizers. "Our subject populations are studying human tactical innovations. Some are attempting to replicate their weapons technology." The High Arbiter's form pulsed with darker patterns. The human recordings were perhaps the most dangerous development of all. The Council had always maintained control through the perception that resistance was futile, that their technological superiority made rebellion pointless. Now, every enslaved species in the galaxy was watching footage of primitive human vessels destroying Council warships through sheer audacity and innovative tactics. "What is the status of our military reconstruction?" the High Arbiter demanded. Fleet Commander Felnara, who had barely survived the battle at Earth, projected her report through the chamber's central display system. Her once elegant bioluminescent patterns were marred by stress-induced scarring, and her voice carried the bitter undertone of defeat. "Total fleet losses, 47%. Command structure casualties, 63%. Morale index among surviving forces, critical levels. Many ship commanders are requesting reassignment to defensive positions rather than offensive operations." The silence that followed was deafening. In 3,000 years of Council expansion, fleet losses had never exceeded 5% in any single engagement. The idea that nearly half their forces could be destroyed by a species that hadn't achieved faster-than-light travel until 2 years ago was beyond the comprehension of most Council members. "There is another concern," added Dr. Chirath of the Gasinity Vorthack Collective, her translated voice wavering with what could only be described as fear. "Our xenopsychology specialists have completed their analysis of human combat behavior. Their findings are disturbing." The High Arbiter gestured for her to continue, though every instinct it possessed was screaming that it didn't want to hear what came next. "The humans appear to become more effective combatants when facing overwhelming odds," Dr. Chirath reported. "Standard psychological warfare tactics that would break the morale of any civilized species instead seem to increase their aggression and tactical creativity. They exhibit what can only be described as a pathological enjoyment of impossible challenges. That's not possible, protested Counselor Vextai. No species can evolve such characteristics and still achieve interstellar civilization. The mathematics of social development preclude it. The evidence is undeniable, Dr. Chirath continued. Humans who were civilian non-combatants performed kamikaze attacks against our vessels while broadcasting what our translation systems identify as expressions of joy. Their military casualties are being celebrated as heroes rather than mourned as losses. Most disturbing of all, their response to our threat of planetary extinction was to begin preparing for what they call asymmetrical warfare, essentially planning to continue fighting even after their homeworld is destroyed. The High Arbiter felt something that its ancient consciousness had no frame of reference for: genuine terror. In 5 millennia of galactic conquest, the Council had never encountered a species that seemed to view extinction as merely another tactical challenge to overcome. Recommendations? It asked, though it dreaded the answer. Fleet Commander Thelnara's response was immediate and absolute. Complete sterilization of the Sol system using planet-killer weapons, followed by systematic elimination of any species showing signs of human influence. This infection cannot be allowed to spread. The chamber erupted in debate as representatives from dozens of species argued over the proposed response. The more cautious voices pointed out that humanity's defensive capabilities were clearly beyond what they had initially calculated. Others argued that using planet killers would send a message to other subject species that resistance would result in complete annihilation. But a smaller group, led by the ancient bioentities of the Deep Collective, proposed something even more drastic. The human contamination may be irreversible, transmitted Elder Vasquoth, whose species existed as pure information patterns within quantum computers. Our analysis suggests that their very presence in the galaxy represents an evolutionary catalyst that cannot be contained through conventional means. What are you suggesting? The High Arbiter asked. Total galactic sterilization. Vasquoth replied with the cold logic of a computerized intelligence. Systematic elimination of all biological life in the galaxy, followed by reconstruction under proper council guidance. It is the only way to ensure that the human aberration cannot spread to other species. The suggestion was so extreme that even the High Arbiter was momentarily speechless. The Deep Collective was proposing genocide on a scale that would dwarf every atrocity in galactic history combined. The murder of hundreds of billions of sentient beings to prevent the spread of human influence. Surely there are less extreme alternatives, protested Counselor Vextai, her harmonic voice showing signs of strain. Perhaps we could negotiate with the humans, offer them isolated systems where they could develop independently without threatening galactic stability. Impossible, Dr. Chirath responded immediately. Our psychological profiles indicate that humans cannot accept isolation if they believe other species are being oppressed. Their historical records show a consistent pattern of intervening in conflicts that don't directly affect them, simply because they perceive injustice being done to others. It was true, and the High Arbiter knew it. The human recordings from Earth had included messages not just of defiance toward the Council, but expressions of sympathy for other enslaved species and promises to liberate them from Council control. Humanity wasn't fighting just for their own freedom. They were apparently planning to free every subjugated civilization in the galaxy. The infection is already spreading beyond our ability to contain, continued Elder Vasquoth. Our intelligence reports indicate that 17 subject species have made contact with human resistance cells. They are sharing technology, tactical information, and what can only be described as ideological contamination. The High Arbiter accessed the classified reports and felt its energy form destabilize slightly as it processed the information. The humans hadn't been content to merely defend their homeworld. In the 3 weeks since their victory, they had somehow established contact with enslaved populations across the galaxy and were actively encouraging rebellion. Worse yet, they were sharing their most dangerous innovation. The concept that advanced technology could be defeated by inferior forces using unconventional tactics and absolute determination. Species that had been docile for centuries were beginning to experiment with guerrilla warfare, psychological operations, and the kind of chaotic improvisation that had made human forces so devastatingly effective. "Show me the Kepler-7 incident," the High Arbiter commanded. The chamber's display systems activated, showing surveillance footage from a mining world where the enslaved Tokari population had recently attempted an uprising. The images were disturbing beyond anything the Council had experienced in millennia of rule. The Tokari were a peaceful, highly intelligent species that had been conquered by the Council over 1,000 years ago. They had been model subjects ever since, contributing their advanced computational abilities to Council projects while living contentedly in the designated reservation cities. But 3 weeks ago, everything had changed. Somehow, they had obtained human technical manuals and tactical guides. More importantly, they had absorbed something far more dangerous than mere technology. They had learned to think like humans. The footage showed Tokari civilians using improvised weapons to attack Council garrison forces. But what was most disturbing was their behavior during the fighting. Instead of the orderly, logical approach that characterized their species, they were fighting with chaotic creativity that seemed almost human. "They're singing," Counselor Vextai observed with horror. "They're singing while they attack our forces." It was true. The Tokari rebels were broadcasting what could only be described as battle songs, compositions that their translation systems indicated contained themes of freedom, defiance, and willingness to die for independence. It was behavior that should have been impossible for their species to exhibit. Human psychological contamination runs deeper than mere tactical instruction, Dr. Chirath reported. They appear to be spreading something that can only be described as a mental virus. The concept that freedom is worth any sacrifice, that resistance to overwhelming force is not only possible, but morally necessary. The High Arbiter studied the data streams flowing through the Chamber's information networks. Similar incidents were occurring throughout Council space. Species that had been peaceful for millennia were suddenly exhibiting aggressive, irrational behavior that defied everything the Council understood about civilized development. On Zirian Prime, the aquatic benthic collective had somehow converted their industrial facilities into weapons manufacturing plants. On the crystal worlds of Harmony, the silicon-based resonant ones were using their natural harmonic abilities to disrupt Council communication networks. Most shocking of all, on the garden world of Serenity, the telepathic empaths had broken their 1,000-year vow of pacifism and were actively hunting Council administrators. "The situation is deteriorating faster than our most pessimistic projections," Fleet Commander Thelnara reported. "We're facing coordinated uprisings on 43 worlds, with more beginning daily. Our garrison forces are requesting immediate reinforcement or evacuation." The High Arbiter made its decision with the cold finality that had characterized Council rule for 3 millennia. "Begin preparation for Protocol 7. If the human contamination cannot be contained, then we will sterilize the entire galaxy and begin reconstruction with species that we can properly guide from their earliest development." Protocol 7 was the Council's ultimate contingency plan, developed in the early days of their expansion when they had feared that some alien intelligence might prove too dangerous to coexist with. It involved the systematic deployment of planet-killer weapons to every inhabited world in the galaxy, followed by the cultivation of new species that could be controlled from birth. It was genocide on an unimaginable scale, but the High Arbiter could see no alternative. Humanity had introduced something into the galaxy that was more dangerous than any weapon or disease. They had given other species the idea that they could fight back and win. Estimated timeline for Protocol 7 implementation, it asked. 6 standard months for full deployment, Elder Vasquoth replied. "We have enough planet-killer weapons in storage to sterilize every inhabited world in the galaxy twice over. The process is irreversible once initiated." The High Arbiter felt a moment of what an outside observer might have recognized as sadness. In 5,000 years of existence, it had overseen the rise and fall of countless civilizations, always believing that it was guiding the galaxy toward a greater peace and prosperity. Now, it was preparing to destroy everything it had helped to build. But humanity had left it no choice. They had proven that advanced, peaceful civilizations were no match for primitive beings who valued freedom over security, who preferred chaos to order, and who would rather die fighting than live as subjects. Begin implementation immediately, the High Arbiter commanded, and prepare our final offer to the humans. Perhaps when they understand the consequences of their actions, they will agree to voluntary extinction to save the rest of the galaxy. As the council session dissolved into urgent preparations for galactic genocide, none of the assembled beings noticed the small data packet that had been quietly transmitted from the chamber's quantum communication array. The signal was encrypted using human algorithms and directed toward a seemingly empty region of space where no inhabited worlds existed. Dr. Elena Vasquez, monitoring the transmission from her hidden position aboard a cloaked reconnaissance ship, allowed herself a grim smile. The council thought they were the only ones with intelligence networks throughout the galaxy. They were about to learn that humans were very quick studies when it came to espionage. Signal all resistance cells, she transmitted to her communications officer. Operation Prometheus is confirmed. The council is preparing for total galactic sterilization. Initiate all contingency plans immediately. As the message spread through hidden networks that connected dozens of worlds, Elena couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed since her dramatic rejection of the Council's membership offer. Humanity had gone from being an isolated, primitive species to the center of the largest rebellion in galactic history. The question now was whether they could turn a galaxy-wide uprising into something more than just a grand gesture of defiance. The Council was preparing to commit genocide beyond anything in recorded history, and humanity had less than 6 months to prevent it. But as Elena watched the tactical displays showing resistance activities across dozens of star systems, she felt something that she was beginning to recognize as a uniquely human emotion in the face of impossible odds: eager anticipation. The Council was about to discover that when humans said they would fight to the last breath, they weren't speaking metaphorically. The real war was about to begin. The rebellion began at exactly 0000 hours Galactic Standard Time, coordinated across 47 star systems in what would later be called the Great Awakening. It started not with massive fleet engagements or planetary bombardments, but with something far more devastating to the Council's authority: laughter. On every Council-controlled world, enslaved populations had spent months learning from human instructors who had infiltrated their communities through quantum communication networks. They had studied not just human tactics and technology, but something far more dangerous: human psychology. They had learned to see their oppressors not as godlike entities to be feared, but as bullies to be mocked. Dr. Elena Vasquez watched the rebellion unfold from the bridge of the human stealth ship Indomitable, hidden in the asteroid field surrounding Nexus Prime. The tactical displays showed a galaxy in chaos as species that had been docile for centuries suddenly remembered how to fight. "Ma'am, we're receiving coordinated signals from all resistance cells," reported Communications Officer Liu. "Operation Prometheus is executing on schedule across all targeted systems." Elena nodded, though her attention was focused on the primary display showing the Council's homeworld. Nexus Prime was the most heavily defended position in the galaxy, surrounded by orbital fortresses and protected by energy shields that could withstand the impact of small moons. It was supposed to be impregnable, but humans had learned something important during their centuries of warfare. There was no such thing as an impregnable position. There was only insufficient creativity in finding ways to destroy it. "Signal from Admiral Chun," Liu reported. "Human fleet units are in position and awaiting your command." Elena took a deep breath and activated the galaxy-wide communication network that had been secretly constructed over the past 6 months. Her next words would be transmitted to every inhabited world in the galaxy, translated into hundreds of languages, and broadcast on frequencies that the Council couldn't jam without shutting down their own communication systems. "People of the galaxy," she began, her voice carrying across space to reach billions of enslaved beings. 6 months ago, the Galactic Council declared war on humanity for the crime of refusing to surrender our freedom. Today, we declare war on the Council for the crime of stealing yours. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across dozens of worlds, populations that had been quietly preparing for this moment erupted into coordinated action. But this wasn't the chaotic violence that the Council had feared. It was something far more dangerous. It was organized, purposeful resistance conducted by beings who had learned from human military doctrine. On the mining world of Kepler-7, the Tokari population had spent months secretly converting their industrial equipment into weapons. When Elena's signal reached them, they didn't attack randomly. They struck with precision at every Council administrative center simultaneously, using improvised explosives and hacked security systems to neutralize their oppressors before they could respond. On the crystal worlds of harmony, the silicon-based resonant ones used their natural harmonic abilities to create feedback loops in the Council's energy weapons, turning their own defensive systems against them. The beautiful singing that characterized their species had been transformed into a weapon more devastating than any human firearm. Most shocking of all was what happened on the telepathic world of empathy. The peaceful empaths had spent 1,000 years refusing to use their psychic abilities for violence. But human instructors had taught them a crucial lesson. There was a difference between violence and necessary force. As Council garrison troops attempted to suppress the uprising, they found themselves facing an enemy that could read their thoughts, predict their actions, and coordinate perfectly without any external communication. The telepathic empaths fought with an efficiency that made human special forces look clumsy by comparison. Report from all sectors. Elena commanded as data poured in from across the galaxy. Kepler-7 liberated, reported Lieutenant Commander Torres. Tokari forces have secured all major installations and are broadcasting messages of freedom to neighboring systems. Harmony systems reporting successful defensive actions. Council forces in full retreat. Empathy confirms liberation complete. They're requesting permission to begin evacuation of Council administrative personnel, rather than, well, they're asking if they should show mercy. Elena smiled at that last report. Even in revolution, some species retained their essential nature. But they had learned something from humanity that would serve them well. Mercy was a choice made from a position of strength, not weakness. "Tell them mercy is approved for surrendering personnel," Elena replied. "But make it clear that anyone who continues to resist will face the consequences." The liberation of individual worlds was proceeding faster than even Elena's most optimistic projections. But the real test was about to begin. Long-range sensors showed the Council's response fleet emerging from hyperspace around Nexus Prime. Over 1,000 vessels carrying planet-killer weapons, and crews who had been given orders to sterilize every rebellious world in the galaxy. "Admiral Chun, this is Dr. Vasquez," Elena transmitted to the human fleet commander. "Council response fleet is deploying as predicted. Are your people ready for the big show?" "Copy that, Elena," came Chin's reply from the flagship Defiance. "All human forces report ready for Operation Ragnarok. Time to show the Council what happens when you threaten to commit genocide against people we've adopted as family." Operation Ragnarok was humanity's ultimate gambit, a direct assault on Nexus Prime using every ship, weapon, and volunteer they could muster. The plan was mathematically impossible, tactically insane, and completely dependent on the Council making decisions based on rational thought processes. In other words, it was perfectly suited to human capabilities. "All ships begin approach to Nexus Prime," Elena ordered. "Remember, we're not just fighting for our own freedom today. were fighting for the right of every intelligent species in the galaxy to determine their own destiny. What followed would be remembered as the Battle of Nexus Prime, though historians would note that it was less a battle than a demonstration of what happened when an irresistible force met an object that thought it was immovable. The Council's defensive fleet moved to intercept the approaching human vessels, confident that their overwhelming numerical superiority and technological advantages would ensure quick victory. They had learned from their earlier defeats and were no longer underestimating human capabilities. What they hadn't anticipated was that the humans weren't planning to fight a conventional space battle. All ships, execute Phase 1, Admiral Chen commanded. Instead of engaging the Council fleet directly, the human vessels scattered throughout the Nexus system and began broadcasting on every communication frequency simultaneously. But they weren't transmitting tactical information or surrender demands. They were broadcasting music. Specifically, they were broadcasting the battle songs, freedom anthems, and revolutionary hymns that had been composed by the liberated species over the past 6 months. The Tokari harmonies that spoke of breaking chains. The resonant crystalline songs that vibrated with the joy of independence. The telepathic choruses of the empaths that carried emotions too complex for non-psychic species to understand. The psychological effect on the Council forces was devastating. For 3 millennia, they had ruled through the assumption that they were bringing peace and order to primitive civilizations that would benefit from their guidance. Now, they were hearing the voices of those civilizations expressing joy, defiance, and absolute determination to be free. What is the purpose of this audio transmission? Demanded Fleet Commander Thelnara from her flagship. Are they attempting some form of psychological warfare? The answer came not from the human fleet, but from an unexpected source. Across the galaxy, the liberated worlds were joining the broadcast, adding their own voices to the growing chorus of freedom. The communication networks that the Council had built to coordinate their empire were being used to spread a single message. The age of oppression was ending. Phase 2, execute now, Chen ordered. The human ships began their attack run on Nexus Prime itself, but their target wasn't the heavily defended orbital platforms or the energy shields protecting the planet's surface. Instead, they were heading for the quantum communication relays that connected the Council's homeworld to their scattered forces throughout the galaxy. It was a typically human insight. If you couldn't defeat an enemy through superior force, you could paralyze them by cutting off their ability to coordinate their advantages. The Council fleet moved to intercept, but they found themselves facing the same problem that had plagued them in every engagement with human forces. The humans weren't fighting according to any recognizable tactical doctrine. Some ships were engaging in conventional combat, while others were performing what could only be described as elaborate aerial acrobatics that served no apparent military purpose. The acrobatics, however, had a very specific purpose that became clear when the human vessels began ramming the communication relays with pinpoint precision. Each ship that sacrificed itself took out critical infrastructure that would take years to rebuild. "They're severing our command networks," reported the tactical officer aboard Thelnara's flagship. "We're losing contact with our forces in the outer systems." Impossible, Thelnara replied. No rational species would sacrifice valuable ships to destroy communication equipment when they could be engaging our military forces. But that was exactly the point. Humans weren't rational by Council standards. They understood that winning a war wasn't about destroying the enemy's ships. It was about destroying their ability to function as a coordinated force. As the communication relays failed one by one, the Council fleet found itself increasingly isolated from the broader conflict raging across the galaxy. Reports were reaching them in fragments. Entire star systems declaring independence, Council garrisons surrendering or fleeing, and, most disturbing of all, member species beginning to question their loyalty to the Council itself. "This is impossible," transmitted the High Arbiter from its fortress on Nexus Prime. "We have maintained galactic order for 3 millennia. How can primitive beings and their subject allies challenge our authority?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Counselor Vextai, the elegant Zephyrian who had been one of humanity's first contacts, activated a private communication channel to the High Arbiter's chambers. "Ancient One," she said, her harmonic voice carrying undertones of profound sadness. "Perhaps we have been asking the wrong question. The humans haven't challenged our authority. They've revealed that our authority was always an illusion." "Explain," the High Arbiter demanded, though its energy patterns were already shifting toward the darker frequencies that indicated deep distress. "We maintain control by convincing our subjects that resistance was futile," Vextai replied. "But the humans have proven that resistance is not only possible, but inevitable once beings understand that freedom is a choice worth dying for. We didn't rule through strength, we ruled through fear. And fear is powerless against people who are no longer afraid to die." As if to emphasize her point, the tactical displays showed another wave of human ships approaching Nexus Prime. But these vessels weren't military craft. They were civilian transports, cargo haulers, and passenger liners that had been hastily converted to carry weapons. Worse yet, they were broadcasting messages of greeting to the liberated populations throughout the galaxy. "This is Captain Rodriguez of the civilian vessel New Horizon," came one transmission. "We've got refugees from 17 different star systems aboard, and they all want to send a message to the Council. The message is simple. You can't oppress people who refuse to stay oppressed." The High Arbiter felt its ancient consciousness fragmenting as it processed the implications of what it was witnessing. The humans hadn't just defeated the Council militarily. They had revealed the fundamental flaw in the Council's entire philosophy. A civilization based on control and submission could never truly defeat one based on freedom and voluntary cooperation. "All Council forces, implement Protocol 7 immediately," the High Arbiter commanded in desperation. "Begin planetary sterilization operations before the infection can spread further." But it was too late. Across the galaxy, Council fleet commanders were discovering that their own crews were refusing orders to commit genocide. Millennia of indoctrination about bringing peace and order to the galaxy had created military forces that couldn't bring themselves to murder billions of innocent beings. On dozens of ships, crews were mutinying rather than participate in mass extinction. Other vessels were simply withdrawing from combat zones, their commanders declaring neutrality in a conflict they no longer understood. Most devastating of all were the reports from the Council's subject species who served in their military forces. The Tokari computational specialists were sabotaging targeting systems. The empaths were using their telepathic abilities to communicate with potential targets and coordinate evacuations. Even the peaceful Zephyrians were using their harmonic abilities to disrupt weapon charging sequences. "Admiral Chun, this is Dr. Vasquez," Elena transmitted from her position near Nexus Prime. "Council forces are fragmenting faster than our most optimistic projections. I think we've reached the tipping point." "Copy that," Chun replied. "Beginning final phase operations. All human forces prepare for the endgame." The endgame was something that no military strategist in galactic history had ever attempted. The peaceful conquest of an entire empire through the voluntary surrender of its leadership. Instead of bombarding Nexus Prime into submission, the human fleet took up position around the planet and began broadcasting a message that was translated into every language known to Council linguistics computers. It was Elena's voice, calm and reasonable despite the chaos raging throughout the galaxy. "High Arbiter and members of the Galactic Council, this is Dr. Elena Vasquez speaking for the Free World Alliance. Your empire is ending not because we destroyed it, but because its own people have chosen freedom over oppression. We offer you the same choice we offer all sentient beings. Join us as equals in building a better galaxy, or step aside and let others do the work you were too afraid to attempt." The response came not from the High Arbiter, but from a source that shocked everyone involved in the conflict. "This is Counselor Vextai of the Zephyrian Collective," came the transmission from Nexus Prime. "On behalf of 17 Council member species, I formally request negotiations for our surrender and integration into the Free World Alliance. We have spent 3 millennia believing that order was more important than freedom. The humans have taught us that we were wrong. The silence that followed lasted for several long minutes, as the implications of the message sank in. The Galactic Council wasn't just facing military defeat. It was experiencing voluntary dissolution as its own member species chose to abandon the system they had created. Elena felt tears streaming down her face as she processed what had just happened. Humanity had set out to win their own independence and had instead liberated an entire galaxy. More importantly, they had done it not through conquest, but through demonstration, showing other species that freedom was possible and